Hello and welcome to the Week in Parliament. Hard Brexit, soft Brexit. It's going to be a slow exit from the European Union, and don't expect any details anytime soon.
It would not be right for me or this government to give a running commentary on negotiations.
There is going to be no running commentary at this stage on the negotiations.
But definitely making his exit was the chairman, who gave us plenty of committee drama.
Why are you still in your post? I'm going to excuse you from this committee because I think your evidence so far has been unsatisfactory.
And buy one, get one free, as the Greens decide to have two co-leaders. An MP says job sharing could be the way forward at Westminster.
I'm really enthusiastic about job shares, so I'd say congratulations to the Green Party for being prepared to be trailblazers in this.
But first, it's 11 weeks since the country voted to leave the European Union. When Theresa May entered 10 Downing Street in mid-July, she assured victorious Leave supporters that Brexit would mean Brexit, a soundbite if ever there was one. So when MPs returned from their summer holidays, many thought they would be in for an informative progress report on how negotiations were going. After all, a cabinet minister had been appointed specifically for the job. David Davis was dubbed the Brexit Secretary. Sure enough, on day one of the new term, Mr Davis was at the Commons dispatch box. But those hoping for a detailed update were disappointed.
Statement, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, Secretary David Davis.
Now, naturally, people want to know what Brexit will mean. Simply, it means leaving the European Union. So we will decide on our borders, our laws and the taxpayers' money. It means getting the best deal for Britain, one that's unique to Britain and not an off-the-shelf solution. We are confident of negotiating a position that will mean this country flourishing outside the EU, keeping its members as our friends, our allies and our trading partners. We will leave the European Union, but we will not turn our back on Europe.
We heard that we were going to hear what the government's strategy for Brexit was. But what we've heard instead hasn't been a strategy, it hasn't been a thought-out plan, it's just been more empty platitudes.
Many of us this afternoon wanted rather more detail than a few more reheated old sound bites this afternoon. We know the old slogans about Brexit means Brexit, and what we got this afternoon was an essay in how waffle means waffle. So can I commend to him the approach of the Japanese government, which has spent the last 7 weeks not simply going to the lengths of setting up a Brexit commission, but has actually gone to the lengths of reporting its results. I hope that diligence and speed will inspire his work in his department over the months to come.
You should know well that what we are doing is not simply looking at the interests of a limited number of companies and a limited number of banks, which is obviously the issue for the Japanese government. We are looking at the interests of a whole economy. So it will take just a touch longer.
So to Wednesday, when the Prime Minister was put on the spot.
The UK government has had all summer to come up with a plan, to come up with a strategy. So far, we've just had waffle. So may I ask the Prime Minister a very simple question, but it's quite important. Does she want the UK to remain fully within the European single market?
Prime Minister.
What I want for the UK is that we put into practice the vote that was taken by the UK people of the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. And I say to the right honourable gentleman that we can approach the vote that took place on the 23rd of June in two ways. We could try and row back on it, we could have a second referendum, we could say we didn't really believe it. Actually, we are respecting the views of the British people. But more than that, we will be seizing the opportunities that leaving the European Union now gives us to forge a new role for the United Kingdom in the world.
Speaker, the European single market is the biggest market in the world, and it really matters to our businesses and it really matters to our economy. I asked the Prime Minister a very, very simple question.
Keep on asking it.
There's either an in or an out answer, so let me ask it again. Does she want the United Kingdom to remain fully part of the European single market? Yes or no?
Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman doesn't seem to quite understand what the vote on the 23rd of June was about. The United Kingdom will leave the European Union, and we will build a new relationship with the European Union. That new relationship will include control of the movement of people from the EU into the UK, and it will include the right deal for trade in goods and services. That is how to approach it. And I also say this to the right honourable gentleman. In looking at negotiations, it would not be right for me or this government to give a running commentary on negotiations.
The Brexit Secretary said that staying in the single market was improbable. The Prime Minister's spokesperson said that was not the case. It's one or the other. Can't be both. So can the Prime Minister tell the House what the government's policy actually is?
It will be a new relationship. And as I indicated in my statement, and indeed in Prime Minister's questions earlier, I will not be giving a running commentary, and the government will not be giving a running commentary on our negotiations. And there's a very good reason for doing that. We want to get the best deal, we want to get the right deal for the United Kingdom, and if we were to give a constant running commentary and give away our negotiating hand, then that would not be what we would achieve.
Why did the Prime Minister authorise a very public dressing down of the Brexit Secretary merely for telling the House that membership of the single market and free movement of people tend to go together? Isn't it possible that the Brexit Secretary, who's believed in this stuff for years, has thought more deeply about it than the Prime Minister, who's been a Brexiteer for a matter of weeks? And can we revert in this House to the traditional practice where ministers are disciplined for misleading the House, as opposed to the odd occasion where they're caught telling the truth?
Please, could she tell us and clear up the confusion from yesterday? Does she value membership of the single market? Does she think it should be an aim or an objective of the negotiations, and that we should be trying to stay in it if we can?
We will be looking to develop a new model of the relationship between the UK and the European Union, and we will not, as I said earlier, be setting out every bit of our negotiating hand in advance of entering those negotiations, because that would be the best way to come out with the worst deal.
Definitely not the last word on Brexit. Now, are they the way to improve social mobility, or do they belong to a bygone era? The words grammar schools, more often than not, produce a strong reaction, either for or against, among both public and the politicians. And even before the government unveiled its consultation on its plans, allowing every secondary school in England to become a grammar, MPs and peers were getting their thoughts in early. In the Commons, the Education Secretary, herself the product of a comprehensive school, said she was open-minded about selection. She said the education world had seen many changes in the last 30 years.
We now have a whole variety of educational offers available. There'll be no return to the simplistic binary choice of the past, where schools separate children into winners and losers, successes or failures. This government wants to focus on the future, to build on our success since 2010 and to create a truly 21st century school system. But we want a system that can cater for the talent and the abilities of every single child. So to achieve that, we need a truly diverse range of schools and specialisms.
This policy will not help social mobility, Mr Speaker, but will entrench inequality and disadvantage. It will be the lucky few who can afford the tuition who will get ahead, and the disadvantage that will be left behind.
The Secretary of State well knows that apart from the best possible teaching, the most important thing we can do for our young people is to encourage them as they make their way through school. Given that we still as a nation are dealing with the legacy of a divided education system, why on earth does she think that subjecting more 11-year-old children to that experience of their tearful parents having opened the envelope, telling them that they have failed, is going to encourage and support them in their self-esteem and their continuing career through the education system.
I'm sure many across Torbay, where 3 grammar schools work perfectly well with comprehensive schools, a studio school and a very successive technical college, we've been listening to some of the comments we've had today, particularly from the Shadow Education Secretary, with some amazement. Would you agree with me that there's really nothing radical about the idea that we're going to give other areas the chance to choose to have the education system Torbay already benefits from?
The Minister will surely share the view the biggest and most significant problem in British education is the long tail of underperforming boys in our poorer areas, few of whom will actually pass the 11+. How on earth does she think the creation of grammar schools, in simple terms, is a solution to this?
As my right honourable friend will know, people move to Kent because of its grammar schools. Does she agree that it's not right for an excellent academic education to be only available to those who can move to the catchment areas of outstanding schools?
Well, we do need to improve diversity and improve choice. As the Prime Minister said, the reality is too often in Britain we do have selection, but it's on the basis of house prices, which is totally unacceptable.
And plenty of opinions also in the House of Lords.
Does the Minister not accept that for every grammar school there is consequentially 3 secondary modern schools? In other words, that comprehensive schools become secondary modern schools, so that one child's social mobility is bought at the expense of the destruction of opportunity for 3 other children?
Anyone who's really concerned about the great lack of social mobility in recent years will be delighted about any possibility of the return of grammar schools, since it was their destruction that was a major cause of the reduction in social mobility.
Some thoughts on grammar schools. Now a look at some of the other stories around Parliament in the last 7 days. As the Paralympic Games move into full swing, British success at the Rio Olympics was recognised in Parliament. Team GB came second in the medals table, pushing the Chinese out to 3rd place.
I know that the whole House will join me in congratulating the British Olympic team on a truly magnificent performance in Rio. That record medal haul, 2nd in the table ahead of China. And so many memorable moments. We can say they did themselves and their country proud.
Can I join the Prime Minister in congratulating the entirety of the Olympic team for their fantastic achievements at the Olympics in Rio?
How safe is this place? BBC Panorama reveals the concerns of a whistleblower about standards at the Sellafield nuclear reprocessing plant in Cumbria. Local MPs are worried.
I have many constituents who work at Sellafield, and they've been in touch with me, as has the local Prospect Union, because they're concerned about what the Panorama programme said about safe staffing levels. Because these staff are committed to the highest standards of safety. They're a huge asset to our nuclear industry, and they feel undermined by what has been said in this programme.
As far as the independent regulator is concerned, who attaches enormous importance to Sellafield in terms of the resources that they commit to monitoring this on a very proactive, active basis, Sellafield is safe.
Is it ready for takeoff, or at least approaching the runway? Peers wonder where that decision on the future of Heathrow Airport has gone.
Should we not consider not asking the question as to whether or not Heathrow is going to have a runway, or whether Gatwick is going to, but ask the question of whether Gatwick and Heathrow are going to have runways?
My noble friend, Lord Spicer, asked when the government's decision will be announced. I wonder if my noble friend could answer that question.
The best answer I can give is that the government will be looking to make that decision very shortly.
A glimmer of hope in the attempts to end a long dispute. Junior doctors in England call off their planned week of strikes in September, but walkouts are still on the cards for future months.
This afternoon's news delaying the first strike is, of course, welcome. But we mustn't let it obscure the fact that the remaining planned industrial action is unprecedented in length and severity, and will be damaging for patients, some of whom will have already had operations cancelled.
The public is looking for the Secretary of State to try and meet the junior doctors, stop vilifying, stop pretending they're enemy within, and meet their reasonable demands.
New term, new plans for the future. At the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood, the First Minister sets out the legislative way forward.
The outcome of the EU referendum has created significant uncertainty and anxiety for individuals, businesses, organisations and communities right across the country. We will introduce a social security bill. This will see us take the first steps towards a distinctive Scottish social security system based on dignity and respect. This bill will be a powerful demonstration of our determination to use new powers to create the fairer Scotland that we wish to see.
I hope that this will start a new phase in the Scottish Government's approach to welfare, one which spends less time complaining about UK Government policy and more time spelling out what it intends to do with the powers it now has.
A new report says the Palace of Westminster is not just creaking and crumbling, it could suffer a catastrophic event. One MP wonders if it's worth spending billions on restoration and renovation.
This morning, it was announced that billions of pounds will be spent on refurbishing this House. Now, I'm sure the Leader of the House meant to announce that we're going to have the full statement on this and when we're going to have a proper debate in government time about these proposals, particularly when we learn that this could cost up to £4.3 billion of public money, and I'm sure all our constituents would want to know exactly if that's a good use of public money.
Does anybody know what this man does in his latest job? Patrick McLaughlin is the new Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Come again?
The honeymoon period for the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is well and truly over. I've been asking a series of questions about his responsibilities, which have not been answered after 56 days in office. So can I ask any member of this team, where is he today and what does he actually do?
Minister. The honourable gentleman has asked a number of questions. I'll make sure that I relay his questions to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, but he is responsible for the Chancellery of the Duchy of Lancaster.
And as a tailpiece, MPs have been putting their dogs through their paces in the hope of winning the coveted award of Westminster Dog of the Year. The award went to Labour's Jonathan Reynolds and his two dogs, named after two American presidents, Clinton and Kennedy. Well, moving swiftly on. In a first for a Westminster party, the Greens have elected Caroline Lucas and Jonathan Bartley as co-leaders, replacing Natalie Bennett, who stood down as leader in July. Job sharing remains rare in the world of politics. There have been calls to allow MPs to split their workload between two people. Our reporter Ros Ball spoke to the Conservative MP Sarah Wollaston, who was herself a job-sharing obstetrician and GP. Ross asked her why she thinks job sharing might work for MPs.
Well, I have experience of job sharing myself as a doctor. I job shared for over a decade, and I think the thing about job sharing is a lot of advantages to it, not only for the individuals themselves who are job sharing, but the people that they are working for. Very often you end up with more than the equivalent of a single whole-time worker. You often also bring in two areas of expertise. So, for example, the job share partner I was working with in medicine, we both had areas of special interest, and we could both bring that to the role. But I think within politics, I can see that working very well. So, for example, I have a lot of expertise in health and social care, for example, but less expertise in business. So if I was job sharing with someone who had that role, you could bring both into a single role, which would be good. But I think also crucially, you could allow some people to become MPs who might not be able to do so if it was a single full-time role. So somebody perhaps with disabilities who didn't feel that they were able to commit to a full-time role for whatever reason. I think that would allow us to have a much more representative Parliament, which I think is a good thing.
So who needs more convincing about job sharing, do you think? Is it the people here at Westminster or is it the public?
Understandably, people feel very strongly about the link, the constituency link, and they worry that all the pitfalls people look at. What would happen if it didn't work out? What would happen if one person dropped out? All those kind of things. But that, as I say, can happen with single full-time MPs as well. So I think rather than seeing all these as insurmountable barriers, yes, we should look at how you could overcome them. And I think very clearly up front, people should have a plan for how they would manage that, because ultimately it's the voters who decide. If the voters didn't want to have a job-sharing MP representing them, they could put their cross elsewhere, just as they can do now.
So the Green Party are forging ahead and job sharing for the leadership role. As someone who's job shared, what would your advice be to them on how to make it work?
My advice would be communication between you and also outside. I'd love to see this work. I'm really enthusiastic about job shares, so I'd say congratulations to the Green Party for being prepared to be trailblazers in this, and I hope it works, and the absolute key to it, I think, is good communication.
Sarah Wollaston. Now, a little bit of history. In 1999, the government of Tony Blair got rid of all the hereditary members of the House of Lords. Well, not quite all. 92 hereditaries were left. And despite several deaths over the years, there are still 92. The reason being that every time a hereditary peer passes away, an election is held within the Lords to replace him or her. A Labour peer, Lord Grocott, has said this temporary measure has gone way past its sell-by date and ought to be ditched.
In most respects, hereditary peers in this House are completely indistinguishable from any other peer, apart from the absurd anomaly of their being able to pass on their passage to another of their number when they die or retire. My Lords, the by-election system is way past its sell-by date. My bill scraps it in 2 simple clauses. For this House to take the lead and pass it would enhance our reputation and improve our Parliament. Its passage would hurt no one and cost nothing.
The history of debates in this House about the future of hereditary peers by-elections has not been a happy one. But let us put an end to them now, pass this bill and bring an end to a process which does no credit to this House, to Parliament generally, or to British democracy.
Yeah. The government does not believe that now is not the time for comprehensive reform, giving the priorities elsewhere, not least implementing the result of the EU referendum.
My noble friend talks about incremental changes and then says, oh gosh, we've got a lot of the other important things to deal with, such as Brexit. I cannot understand why this tiny, modest bill, which will take very little time of Parliament, should in any way compromise the other major changes. And I cannot understand why the government should resist this tiny but important and sensible bill.
It just would change the whole position of the House, and this is not the time to do that. But what we do want to do is to keep talking about this problem. And the new leader, let me finish. The new leader looks forward to working with peers to support incremental reform, which command consensus across the House.
And Lord Grocott's bill that would end the hereditary by-election system was later given initial approval, but it's not likely ever to pass into law. Finally, in a year of huge political change, the first week of the new term produced one more. The House of Commons Home Affairs Committee is under new management. The Conservative Tim Lawton will be in charge until a new committee chair is elected. It follows the resignation of this man, Keith Vaz, who became the latest politician brought down by a sex scandal. The Labour MP endured several days of salacious revelations in the tabloid press. Keith Vaz had chaired the Home Affairs Committee for 9 years, a period when its profile was raised considerably. The sessions were often topical and newsworthy, and Mr Vaz's style of chairmanship was always worth a watch.
Mr Buckles, since last Thursday, when this matter was raised in the House of Commons, your company's value, I think, has gone down by 9%. Your chairman has issued a statement not necessarily backing your position. Mm-hmm. Why are you still in your post? Mr Robbins, this is very unsatisfactory. I'm surprised that you cannot answer a question about whether or not someone who is reporting to you knows what their budget is. Mr Robbins, I'm going to excuse you from this committee because I think your evidence so far has been unsatisfactory. I would be grateful if you would let me know by 6 o'clock today whether he knows what it is. That is all this committee is asking. Mr Burnham is not a member of this committee, so what goes on between him and the Home Secretary is entirely different. Do you understand that?
I do understand
Good.
that.
So thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you.
I couldn't. Peter would never let me, and if I ever had done that, Peter or the SIO would have been all over me like a rash. saying, what the hell are you doing?
All this sounds more like Clouseau rather than Columbo.
Well, I mean, I have to say, you know...
having dinner with people you're investigating, you don't know they're being investigated, and you signed deals 2 months
Well, I know they're investigated, of course I do.
I, on one of my interviews, said, I'll take anyone can prove what I said isn't true, I'll take them out to the best dinner of their lives. Oddly enough, no one's come up with it. Any of you demonstrate what I said isn't true?
It may be that nobody actually wants to have dinner with you.
Ignore victims.
I think we're running out of time. I have a final question about...
Time is infinite.
Unfortunately,
we cannot run out of time.
It is, but for this committee...
Who's next? Theresa May? She may not show up. Check she knows what day it is.
Mr Brand, I have a final question for you.
Some interesting moments from what we might call the Keith Vaz years at the Home Affairs Committee. Never a dull moment. Well, almost. That's it for this programme. There will be more fallout from the grammar schools announcement in the Commons and the Lords in the next few days, and the Cabinet Minister David Davis will be undergoing a committee grilling on the Brexit issue. So do join me for the next week in Parliament. Until then, from me, Keith McDougall, goodbye.